What's up? This is Keith Nelson. You're listening to the Rock and Roll and Coffee Show with my friend Joe.
Bringing you the best in music and movie guests. It's the Rock and Roll and Coffee Show. Yeah, with Joe. It's the Rock and Roll and Coffee Show. Yeah, with Joe. It's the Rock and Roll and Coffee Show. Yeah, with Joe. It's the Rock and Roll and Coffee Show. Yeah, with Joe.
All right, welcome to the Rock and Roll and Coffee Show, episode number 53. I'm your host, Joe, and tonight my guest is Adam Hamilton. I had a great time talking with Adam about the time CeCe Devill walked into a club and saw him playing, to the times in LA Guns and everything in between. Adam is currently producing music and has worked with William Shatner, David Hasselhoff, Leif Garrett, and Vanilla Ice, just to name a few. Adam is such a nice guy. It was such a pleasure to talk to him tonight, and I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Now, if you like the Rock and Roll and Coffee Show, head on over to Instagram, Facebook, and now Twitter. We just started our Twitter account, and you can find us there at R&R Coffee Show and follow us on social media. Also, please make sure you go and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and go ahead and give us a review while you're there. All those little things help.
Hey, man.
Damn it, man.
Is it working?
It is working.
Great.
Well, here's the thing. So I had to use my old phone. See, I just had this conversation with Keith Nelson last week because that's when I got the phone.
Yeah.
And the new phones don't have that 3.5 jack on them, and that's how it connects into my audio interface.
Oh, man.
So I got an adapter that connects it, but clearly that didn't work.
Yeah, that sucks.
Yeah.
That's the thing about Apple that as much as I love them, they're always changing shit. It's like, why? Don't fix something that's not broken.
Yeah. But anyway, so now I didn't know this, but I can use my old phone, even though it's not connected to service. I can use it through the Wi-Fi.
Oh, great.
So that's how we're doing this.
Perfect.
How are you, man?
I'm doing okay, man. How about you?
I'm doing all right. I got my first COVID shot yesterday, and it...
oh, that's exciting. That's big.
It is big. It knocked me out today, though. I tell you.
Man, the second one got me and my wife got her so bad she thought flew for like 24 hours.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
But that's good though. They say that's your body. The worse your body reacts to it, the more effective it's supposed to be. As that's what they say.
That's what they say. That's what I hear. So.
Yep. Yeah. So that's good. That's good. It'll be better for you in the long run.
Yeah, man. All right. Well, listen.
Great.
So let's welcome to the Rock and Roll and Coffee Show.
Awesome, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for coming on. I know we've been talking about it for a couple months now, I would say.
Absolutely.
So let's start with you. You grew up in Shreveport, correct?
Yep, Shreveport, Louisiana.
What's it like growing up in Shreveport, Louisiana?
Shreveport was an interesting place. I was born in late '69, so the whole civil rights movement and the racial tensions in the South back then were just palpable. It was crazy. And some of my greatest mentors in music were black artists,
right.
and some of my favorite musicians, were as well. So I spent a lot of time. I got to see it from a different perspective growing up there, and that's where the Louisiana Hayride was, where Elvis got his first big break and started. James Burton is from there. Elvis is a guitar player, and Lead Belly is buried there. It's just got a real rich musical history and background, and you're 4 hours from the Mississippi Delta.
Yeah.
And that's where my grandparents lived. So I would split time between both places and spend summers over there with my grandparents and just literally soaking up I knew there was something magic about where I was living in my life. And musically, it was just something going on. It was like something in the air. You could just feel it.
You knew it at a young age?
Yeah. I mean, I knew I've as long as I remember, music was everything I ever loved and wanted to do. I just was beating on pots and pans at 3, and my uncle said, "You got to get him a drum set." My parents got me a little pawn shop thing, and I played that for 10 years every day, all day long. When I wasn't at school, I was doing that, and they were like, "Well, it looks like he's going to be a drummer." So it's just in me, you know. My cousin is Mose Allison, the artist who wrote Young Man Blues and Parchment Farm. He was a blues pianist, songwriter from Mississippi. So I've just got it in my family, you know. It's in the blood.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Were your parents musicians?
Strangely enough, no, neither of them were. I've got it all around me, except my dad claims to play the accordion, but I never heard him play it. So. but they loved music, and mom and dad always supported me 100%. I mean, I could play drums till 10 o'clock at night above their bedroom in a jam room that they built for us. They were always supportive. They did everything they could. And my dad had this awesome 70s hi-fi system and was an audiophile. So he just, you know, he turned me on to everything from Fleetwood Mac to the Beatles, the Eagles, everything to you know, Buddy Rich big band stuff. And that, you know, he just loved everything and, you know, played everything loud on the big speaker. So we had music playing even though, you know, they weren't musicians themselves.
Sure. What bands did you, when you first found your way in your own music, what were you into?
Well, you know, like I said, my all-time favorites are from when I was a kid. And it's funny how that you just take that with you your whole life, you know, like the Eagles and Fleetwood Mac and all that stuff. But what really crystallized it all for me was Kiss. I mean, I was right at that age where it just got me.
They get everybody.
Yeah, I remember being a kid walking in the music store after we saw a movie at the mall and seeing Kiss Alive 2. And I was just like, what is that? And just taking it home and putting it on, and my life changed, you know?
Right. And then how old were you when you first got into a band situation?
I started jamming with guys around the neighborhood when I was probably in 6th, 7th grade. You know, we knew a few songs. We would jam played really bad versions of Pinball Wizard and Tom Sawyer and You Really Got Me. And that's kind of when it started, though. You know, we really started going, hey, man, bring your guitar over and let's do this. And then the magic starts. Then you're like, whoa, this is incredible.
Yeah.
You know, you have that magic feeling of playing with somebody else and that synergy that you just can't get in any other way. You know, you're sharing the same magic with somebody else in the same room, making the magic. It's crazy.
Yeah. What was the scene like in Shreveport?
Shreveport always had an incredible, I mean, it was small. It was a small town. It's not very big. I mean, I don't even think there's 250,000 people there. There was just so much great blues going on all the time. And there was just great R&B and musicians. And there was just always music everywhere. It's Louisiana. So they're always celebrating something and they're always partying. So there was just always music creeping out of everywhere.
Yeah.
But I think it was an amazing place to love music and to come up. You know, Kenny Wayne Shepherd came out of there. It's got a lot of musicians. Danny Johnson was from there, who played with Rod Stewart and Rick Derringer, and Joe Osborne from the Wrecking Crew lived and died there. And it's got a really great, rich musical heritage about it. But Brian Blade, the amazing jazz drummers from there. I grew up with the Blade brothers, both drummer brothers, and it was amazing, man. It was an amazing school.
Yeah. So you started with drums, but you also played bass and guitar. So when did that transition happen? You know, my brother got a guitar for Christmas, and I would knock around with it, you know, and just decided to this is kind of fun too. I can make music on this. So I just kind of picked up one. You kind of hit plateaus with music, and you're like, okay, well, I'm kind of bored with the drums. Let me find out something else on the guitar, and then you kind of discover a whole new thing, and just kind of add them to the arsenal, you know. Right. Plus, it's hard to write songs on drums. You know, you gotta have another tool to create melody. Yeah, it's a little difficult. Yeah. Plus, you know, I was one of those kids that before I got into multi-tracking, I had 2 tape decks and an old little 4-track realistic Radio Shack little mixer, and I would ping pong and record myself playing drums and then play bass to it and then play guitar to it. And
bounce between the cassette decks, until I had done it about 6 times. You could barely hear it, but I had like a multi-track of me playing, and I'm like, this is it. And now that's pretty much what I do for my living. So, just don't have to use the realistic decks anymore.
Yeah. So you got into production early too then.
Oh yeah. I when I was about in junior high, my dad got me one of those first little cassette 4-tracks. And it just was life changing. I was the guy that would come over and, like, let me record your band. And that was kind of like, hey, let me produce you, without even realizing what that was,
Right.
But I just loved that. Absolutely loved that. Yeah. That playing live and recording music equally have always been just two of my greatest loves. And as much as I love playing live, I've just kind of transitioned into being more of a homebody and studio rat. And that's completely fulfilling for me,
Sure.
because not only do I get to still produce and make albums, I get to play almost every instrument almost every day for some reason or other. And I do I call it my day job, is doing a lot of music for TV, film, and commercials. So I'm, 95% of that gig is me playing all the instruments. Maybe I might have to, if it's something that I need a shredder guy on, I'm going to call one of my shredder buddies and, get them on it. But
Yeah.
I kind of am getting fulfillment because I have to play everything almost every day, wearing all the hats, that I don't feel like I'm missing out by not touring anymore,
Yeah. So what, do you have a studio at home?
I do.
Okay.
We moved out of Hollywood about 12 years ago, and my wife's really big on the whole mid-century modern architecture. And we found this crazy house built in the 56, and you walk in and it looks like the Brady Bunch house. It looks like you're in a time warp. And we were just like, oh my God, this is it. We're home. And it has a separate garage that we converted, and I had a guy who builds studio come out and build it out. And
nice.
That's my man cave, man. And I can rock in there pretty much any time and not bother anybody, and nobody bothers me. It's really nice.
You've probably been spending a lot of time in there during this pandemic, huh?
Oh yeah. Well, we started making another LA Guns record in there. We did the EP there 2 years ago, the Christmas EP they did. And then we figured, well, let's just do the album that way. And then all of a sudden the pandemic hit, and Tracy was over with his family in Denmark. And so we said, well, let's just start passing ideas back and forth, sending files. And one thing led to another, and we just eventually just started making a record like this. And now the record's done, and we just mixed it and turned it in, and it'll be out in the fall. But
nice.
Yeah, I mean, it was all just everybody isolated, and unfortunately, because of the way the situation is, I just ended up having by default to play drums on it, because it was just, everybody was so freaked out about going anywhere or having anybody over.
Sure.
That we just said, you know what? Tracy said, hey man, let's just do it this way. I played on that single Let You Down. And he liked it the way it turned out. So, I felt bad because I love Scotty Coogan's drumming, and I love to be recordist while he plays, because it's just awesome recording him. It's just awesome recording a pro like him that has such great feel and sound. So it would have been fun, but maybe the next record we'll be able to resume going back to old school.
So you did the whole album?
Yeah, I ended up doing the whole thing. I just made a record with Tracy and Michael Sweet called Sunbomb, and I played drums on that whole record.
I heard that. I was going to get into that.
Mixed that. And so I think that's kind of what, by that, we just kind of literally just kind of transitioned to the next chapter. And it was like, well, now we need to do an LA Guns record. Here's all the demos. Let's just continue this process that like we're doing it. And Phil set up a vocal booth at home, and he would be sending us vocals, and we just started working that way. And Johnny would cut bass over with Sam from Faster Pussycat at Hollywood, and they'd send me the files, and we just figured out a way to make it work. I mean, it wasn't the best way, but we made it work, and it's an incredible record. I mean, I'm so proud to be a part of it, and it really is amazing.
Isn't that awesome how you can do that nowadays? Just send files and make a record.
Yeah, for all the pros and cons, when you weigh out the digital era and all the things that it has ruined, like taking away record stores and bookstores
Right.
and a lot of culture and stuff like that, to be able to make and royalties too, but to be able to make records like this, it's just to be a creative. You can be so free being creative and work with anybody you want. And if you really, kind of pick the lock on it and figure out how to do it and how to really capture real great energetic performances, when you do put them together, if you really are on the same page, it sounds like you're in a room playing together. And I know people say, well, you can never replicate that. And it's like, yeah, that's true, but it's a whole different era, man. People have been recording albums, overdubbing each part since the 70s.
Yeah.
So it's really no different. To me, it's like, I don't care how you put the album together. If the end result gives me the chills and it's inspiring and people dig it, I know we like it, and that's the most important thing. And it's a bonus if other people do.
Yeah. So let's go back. So you're in Shreveport, and and you decided to leave there.
Yeah, I always knew that I was going to move. And when I was in high school, I tried to get out of school early, but my parents were like, just finish your last year. You don't have to go to college. We know you're not going to go. My grades were so bad because all I loved to do was music. And I even had a fake ID in high school, and I'd play gigs during the week and then come into school late. And I had that senior year where I was just like, fall asleep on my desk, and I'd be making set lists up for the weekend gigs. So I was just itching to get out of there, and I considered Nashville. I had some friends up in Nashville, and I considered LA and New York, but I'm like, it's just so overwhelming moving that far away. And so I actually ended up going to Austin for a few years and played down there and had a great time, met a lot of great people, played down on 6th Street, got to absorb a whole different culture and scene. And then one night I was playing in a bar, and Cece from Poison walks in. It was when they were on tour for their Flesh and Blood tour. And we just kind of met each other. I went and talked to him and hit it off. And he came and sat in with my band, and we swapped out numbers. And he invited me to the show in Dallas. So I drove up to see him. And after the show, he pulled me on the bus after the show. And he goes, man, I know it looks like we're in the top of the world. I mean, they had a top 10 album, selling out arenas still. This was in the early 90s.
Right.
He goes, but I'm just miserable. I'm ready to leave the band and do my own thing, and I want to start a solo band, and I want you to be my drummer. And I was like, oh my God, you could have knocked me over with a feather. I had that moment where I go, oh my God, this is the big break that they always talked about, that I always dreamed about having, in my bed when I was a kid, like getting discovered.
Yeah.
Like just one day, God, let me get discovered by somebody. And that happened.
Did he already let the band know he was not?
No, he wasn't. He was just kind of plotting and planning. And, as time went on, things just deteriorated. And I think because of his unhappiness in his situation, I think he was partying a lot, doing a lot of drugs, and that was making the situation deteriorate even worse and even faster.
It seems to always happen.
Yeah, and I remember watching the MTV thing where he came out with pink hair, and it was just a train wreck. That Arsenio Hall hosted it.
Yep,
and I just remember thinking to myself, this is the defining moment. Like, he's done. This is it. And I literally got the phone call like a couple of nights later, and he woke me up in the middle of the night. It turned out he had lost my number. That's why I didn't hear from him for like a year after this. And I kind of thought that year was kind of tough for me because I was like, wow, maybe this wasn't my big break, and I'm never going to hear from him again. And I just kind of said, by the time I kind of gotten over that and thought, well, maybe it just wasn't meant to be. And, the disappointment of that, when I'd kind of gotten through that, all of a sudden the phone rang, and he goes, I've lost your number. And I had to call, I tracked your mom and dad down in Shreveport and woke them up at 4 a.m. and got your new number. It's crazy. So he got my number and flew me out to California that weekend and gave me the royal treatment. I had a car pick me up at the airport, drive me up to the top of the Hollywood Hills, the big, huge rock star mansion. And it was.
Were you pinching yourself the whole time?
It was one of the most surreal out of body experiences, you could have. You're just a little kid, from a small town dreaming of doing this, and just like, here's your dream on a silver platter. Welcome to Hollywood, kid. Yeah. And they were still huge, and he was living at the top of the hill next to Burt Reynolds and Diana Ross, and it was just like I was just I pinched myself for that 6 months. It was crazy. It was crazy.
Were you ever in a big city like that before then?
Never. I'd never
Wow.
been to New York or LA or anywhere like that. I'd been to Dallas, Texas, New Orleans, and that's about as, I lived in Austin and San Antonio. That was about as far. It was, overwhelming, but in a good way.
Wow. So,
But when I finally moved out to play with him, it would just be like one day the Bullet Boys are coming over, the next day Steve Lukather's coming by to hang, then the Motley Crue guys, and then Sam Kinnison's coming to hang out one night, and we were literally like partying all night with Sam Kinison, walking around the house singing opera and just telling jokes, and
sounds like a blast.
Ron Jeremy's coming over, and it was just like one after another. It made your head spin. But then I remember after a few months of this, we had practiced every day. We were trying to write songs. We really weren't coming up with too much great stuff because there was just it was just our nights and days were flipped. We slept all day and we jammed in this huge mansion all night and partied and didn't get a lot done. And then some early evenings and days we'd do a photo shoot for magazines or he'd do some press. And well, we kind of rode that wave as long as we could. And then a deal nobody pulled the trigger on signing him. And we just couldn't make it happen. And then I remember it started raining really hard one day, and it rained for almost 2 weeks straight. And it was the torrential El Nino that happened that year. And I remember it was so depressing and things weren't happening. And we were just like, what's going on? And I remember sitting in his house watching the MTV, and Nirvana came on. Smells Like Teen Spirit came on. And we were both like, whoa, look at these guys. And we were tripping out on Dave Grohl and how great a drummer he was. He was just a monster. Yeah. And I remember having this moment. It was this another defining moment where I'm like, whoa, this is the new school. And the Poison stuff is the old chapter. And I remember seeing that page in the book turning right then and there. Yeah. And I remember seeing like, Cece's like the old guard, and Dave Grohl and Nirvana are the new guard. And I just remember seeing it get ushered in before my eyes. And what was really cool was being aware enough and to acknowledge that, because I was young enough to love all that stuff too. I mean, grunge wasn't my favorite, but I loved, rock and roll and music, and I loved how chimes would change. And I never got stuck in the 80s. I loved all that stuff. But listen, I was an early 80s kid. I loved the Buggles and Gary Newman. All that stuff was my favorite music when that was happening. Then the 80s came, and that was my favorite music. And then this came, and and so I just changed with the times and loved what was happening along with it. I just kind of grew and evolved with the times. But I remember having that defining moment where I go, you know what? I love him, but he's probably going to die if he keeps partying like he's doing. And things are not working out. We're not going to get a deal. We're just kind of spinning our wheels. And it was just a sign. It rained 2 weeks in LA and it was flooding. And I just called my mom and dad and I go, I think I need to come home for a break. And they go, yeah, come on, we'll fly you home. So they got me a ticket and I got my stuff and I got out of there. And I just knew, all right, I gotta like regroup. And I went home for a couple of months and just said, you know what? I want to go back to LA. I'm probably not going to play with him, but I want to go out there to stay. And just having done that with him gave me the confidence to do that. I met a lot of contacts, got my picture in the magazines, and I could call up Jerry Miller at Metal Edge and say hi, and she knew who I was. Right. She'd take my call, and I'd say, hey, I'm getting ready to move back to LA. Will you help me find a gig? And she's like, I know a band right now that's looking for a drummer that would be great for you. And she put me together with that band Shake the Faith, which was Kenny Queens from Beautiful Creatures, Tommy Thayer, who obviously is in Kiss now, who was in it, Dave Aragon, who was in it. He was from that show Pimp My Ride on MTV. And they were this great band, and they were getting ready to change their name, and the drummer was going to do something else. And so literally I talked to them on the phone, and they saw some pictures in the magazine of me, and they were like, this is their drummer. This is it. If he can play, he's going to be. So I literally moved out to LA with a gig. It was great. And I moved my stuff out a few months later, moved in with my friend Phil Buckman, who's an actor, and he does a lot of voiceovers. He was also a musician too. He played in Filter for a while and Fuel for a while. Mm-hmm. He does the voice for Carl's Jr. He's like, the Carl's Jr. Da-da-da-da. He has tons of voices. We hear him every day and we always laugh, but he's a great friend of mine. Met him back during the CC days, and he said, come move into my guest house. So I immediately had a place to live. I had a gig, and it wasn't so overwhelming, like moving out to LA and like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I immediately plugged in with all these people and met friends through them, and met friends through the band. And then I've, that was 25 years ago, and I've been here ever since. But that's kind of how I got out to LA. That's the long and short of it.
So you were kind of, not only did you have the talent, clearly, but you were kind of in the right place at the right time when CC walked in that place.
Oh man, listen, there's so many theories to things. You obviously have to work hard and practice and do all that stuff to get prepared for when your opportunities happen. And they say part of it's luck and part of it's this. And it's just it's a little bit of everything, but you got to be prepared. And I think I realized that, look, there's 1 million people. There's 10 million people more talented than I am, but there may be 10 million people that I have more skill too. So I just kind of started to realize that there's plenty of work for everybody. There's a gig for everybody. You'll find your right people. You'll find your right thing. You just have to get in the right place. And try to be cool, man. Try to be cool with people.
Be a good person.
And do the best you can, and try to stand by your word and have integrity, and realize that there's a lot of flakiness in LA, and I realize why that is. It's everybody's hustling out here. People are not out here to just like make a life and have friends, and because of the weather, people are out here. This is an industry town, and people are hustling, and people aren't going to mess around. And opportunities happen every second of every day if you keep your eyes open. I mean, I was in between gigs and just went to see. I would go to the Viper Room like Monday nights and see whoever was playing, and knew a lot of people who worked there, and used to hang out around there. And out from the exit comes Blue Saraceno. And I said, hey, man, I ended up meeting him, and he was super cool, and we kind of hit it off. And I said, hey, what do you do? And he said, well, I'm still doing the Poison gig. And I said, well, listen, if you ever want to do a side band doing something kind of different, let's do it. And so we started a band together, and, we lasted about like 6 months and never really played out or did much. But there you go. Put yourself in the right place at the right time. You see an opportunity, and,
be ready.
I remember one night I was at the Viper Room hanging out, and Billy Idol jumped up there and was singing with the band, the cover band that was playing, and I got and he said, does anybody know the song? Like the guitar player didn't know it, and I jumped up there, and they gave me the guitar, and I got to play for like a half hour of Billy Idol stuff with Billy Idol. And
no way.
That's the kind of stuff that happens when you just put yourself out there and you don't hesitate and think about, oh, should I do this? Should I raise my hand?
That'll kill you.
Don't think about it. Yeah, that's when somebody else just jump over and grab the opportunity. You can't think about it. You just have to jump out there and be willing to fail and be willing to fall on your face. But that's when great things happen. And as well as, I always had faith in God, and I'm like, listen, just put me where you want me, when you want me, and, help me do the right things. And, that's where it's so funny. It seems like life is so, I love this saying that, Joe Walsh, I can't quote him verbatim, but, he said it in that Eagles documentary. He's like, life is so crazy, and it just seems like chaos, one thing happening, banging into this thing, happening and this thing. And it just seems like such a chaotic mess sometimes. And then you look back at your life when you get a little older, and it looks like a finely crafted novel, how one thing led to another. It led to this.
True.
And then it led to this. And it's just like fantastic, to be able to have a little bit of that perspective. Now I'm 51, and to go, wow, it really is crazy. It really is.
You ever think of writing a book?
Yeah, I always think about that, and then I'm like, oh, that would be great for the 20 people who
You'd probably be surprised.
But I definitely have been blessed with a lot of amazing experiences in working with everybody. I've pretty much either met or worked with everybody that I've ever dreamed about working with, in some way, shape, or form. So it would certainly be a labor of love to do that. Absolutely.
So when you told CC you were leaving, was he upset about that, or
no? He wasn't.
He understood.
He knew. He completely understood. And when I came back out, I went up to see him at the house, and when he opened the door, he was in such bad shape that I'm like, this guy really is like days from death. And I just felt so bad. My heart hurt so much for him when I saw him in that condition. And, you know, we hung out for a little bit, but he wasn't even capable of like really talking much or having a jam or anything. And I just left there going, man, that might be the last time I see him.
Yeah.
But thank God it wasn't. He managed to get out of that and get healthy. And he and I reconnected, and we've kind of had an off and on thing for the last 25 years where I won't talk to him for a few years, and then we'll chat, and something will come up. And you know, he did a record with Poison, a cover record years ago, and he asked me to come in and help him, like bring some gear and help him get tones. And I ended up just going and assisting on that whole album, which was amazing. With Don Was producing, and you know, done it at A&M, which is Henson Studios, and you know, it was an amazing experience. And then, you know, a few years will go by and I won't talk to him, and then we'll reconnect again. So it's been an amazing thing. And I've gotten to really tell him how much I appreciated him giving me my first big break and believing in me and mentoring me. And he was the guy that kind of, you know, opened the door to give me the confidence to come in, because he was a guy who was like, you got it, kid, you got it. And that's when somebody like that's done it gives you that confidence, man, you know.
Yeah.
It's what you need. You have to have that naivete, being young and just dumb enough to just believe it and just go for it, you know?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't happen for that many people. When you think of how many people in this world that would love to do the things that we're doing, and really how many people that don't get the opportunity, it's like, man, it's a slim few that do. It's crazy. And then to be able to make a living doing what you love to do is, man, it's everything. It's like Hal Blaine says, man, when you love your work, it's not work.
It's not work.
It's just what you love, you know.
So what happened to what was the name of the band that you moved back out for?
Shake the Faith. Well, Shake the Faith changed their name to Number 9. They were kind of going in a little different direction musically. That just kind of disintegrated after maybe 3 months. You know, it's like keeping a band together is so hard. You know, it's like trying to date 4 or 5 different girls. It just doesn't work. You know, man. Everybody's got a different agenda. Everybody wants to do something different. It's just so hard, and it just kind of fell apart. And then I got a gig with a band. I loved this song back in the early 90s on the radio, and I never knew what the name of it was or the band. And this was prior to the internet, so you couldn't really find out. You would just have those songs that were like, oh, I love that song. I never knew who did it. I got how did I get that? Remember? Oh, yeah. My buddy is in a band called Better Than Ezra from Louisiana. Yep. And his name's Tom Drummond. And I played some gigs with Tom when we were in high school. And so Tom had my number, and I called back to Louisiana because I heard Better Than Ezra might be looking for a new drummer. And I was out of a gig at the time. And Tom said, well, I think we found a guy out in LA and he's moving back here, but I'll keep you posted. But he was playing with a band that was signed to Warner Brothers now, and so they may need a drummer. And I'm like, ooh, they got a deal? This sounds interesting. Well, they call me up and they said, hey, we hear we're auditioning drummers. We want to know if you'd be interested in auditioning. I said, yeah, and they sent their tape over, and I got their tape. Well, the first song on that tape was that song that I loved on the radio, and I didn't know who it was. And I'm like, whoa, talk about, this is like serendipitous.
So you didn't know it was that band?
Didn't know it was the band.
Wow.
They were called God's Child, and the song was called Everybody's One. And it was a minor alternative hit in 94, or 93 maybe. I can't remember what the year was, but it's just an amazing song. And they still had their deal with Warner's, and they were putting out a new record. So I literally learned the songs, went down to the audition, got the gig, and I was on the road touring with them and was with them for like 5 or 6 years. And it was an amazing experience. And it was the first time I'd been with a band that was signed to a major label and got to experience all that. And it was the time where No Doubt was breaking, and 311 and Lit. It was that era of the 90s. And we toured and played with all of those bands, just you name them. And we played with them. And it was great. But unfortunately, that band, we couldn't really get get anything else going at radio with a single. Mm-hmm. And so, it's like everything. Everything has its time, and that had its run. And then through that process, though, I had met a guy named Muddy, And Muddy was this amazing producer and engineer. He looked like a young Jimmy Page leprechaun kind of guy, just magical and fun and totally funny and a brilliant musician. And so we started hanging out and just loved this my new friend. And so he calls me up one night and he goes, "Hey, listen, come up to this house in the Hollywood Hills. There's a studio here. Here's the address. I'm producing a band and I need you to come up and play drums." They're literally carrying their drummer out because he passed out. He's drunk.
Oh, geez.
And studio time is expensive,
Yeah.
you know. And I said, "Well, what are they called?" He said, "The Brian Jonestown Massacre." And so I'd never heard of these guys, and they were still like unknown. And I walk in, and there's this band that looks like straight out of 1960, you know, 70s, just scarves and long hair. They just look like San Francisco. It was like a time warp. And they literally carrying the drummer out as I'm walking in, and they're like, "Hey, thanks for coming." And so I'm like, "Well, play me the song." So I put on the headphones, I get comfortable behind the drum kit, and we literally worked the song out in like 20 minutes, and we did a take, and we got the first take, and it was this really psychedelic, tripped out song. And they've gone on to become like a pretty well-known cult band.
Uh-huh.
But at the time, they were just had a little deal. Nobody knew of them, and they were just amazing. And what was great about them was it was really rough around the edges. It felt like it could all fall apart at one moment.
Yeah.
I mean, there was Joel played tambourine. There was a tambourine guy. That's all he did was play tambourine. It was just magical. It was like you were, you know, it was just like going back and hanging out at Brian Jones's house and just jamming with really, really cool guys, just feeling the vibe, closing your eyes, no click track. And I made that record with them, and it was this incredible experience. And I never played with guys like that, you know, that were just really like living it and free and just really the psychedelic scene. And so they asked me to play on their next record. And, you know, one thing leads to another. And then they asked me to that was called Strung Out in Heaven. And at the time, unfortunately, they named that because it was a real problem with the band. And if you've ever seen that, there's a music doc called Dig, and it's about them and the Dandy Warhols. And it all takes place during the making of that album. And they made it in this house up in Echo Park where they had a studio, but there was just a lot of junkie madness going on. And it was a dark scene, but it was an amazing creative musical scene. And, you know, they're trying to film this documentary, and the Dandy Warhols are up there, and we're trying to make this record, and Muddy's producing that record, and it's quite a doc. You got to see it. Muddy quits
It's called Dig?
It's called Dig,
Okay.
D-I-G. And it's just a fascinating scene, you know, totally different than I had ever experienced. And then after we finished that record, you know, they were trying to kind of sober up enough to go on tour. This was going to be their record that was going to break them out. And it turned out to be the one to help them, you know, take it up to the next plateau. It was kind of the record that they started to get known on. And they asked me to join the band. And that's like, I don't know if I should do this. This is jumping off into like deeper water than I'm equipped to deal with.
Yeah.
I love there was a lot of seductive elements to it. I love the danger of this could all fall apart at any time. But if you see the documentary, you realize that it literally all falls apart almost every night. And the band will literally get in fistfights with the band on stage and beat each other up. And it was too real for me. So I just, you know, I knew that it was probably best that I just said, "Guys, I'll help you find a drummer," and I helped them find somebody, and they went on, and they did great, you know. And one of the guys then went on to do another band called Black Rebel Motorcycle Club, and came out of that whole scene, and he had a lot of success. His name was Peter, and he was one of the guitar players, and they're just amazing. They're still doing it. Anton is just Anton is just genius, man. People that know and love that band just absolutely love them, but it's very shambolic and really psychedelic. You know, smoke a little pot and listen to one of their records, and it's a trip. It's crazy.
And what year was this? And
this was probably 96, maybe somewhere around there. My ability to recall years, I'm bad with years and stuff like that. But
no worries.
It was like mid 90s, maybe later, maybe 97, something around then.
And is that what? Because you joined LA Guns shortly.
Yeah,
After
so
that, right?
that's so how once again how one thing leads to another. I get a call from Muddy. Maybe a year later, Muddy had joined LA Guns and was playing bass with them, and so I would keep up with him and say, "Hey, how's the road? I'm going to come see you here." And knew he was having a great time. Well, after about a year of doing this, Muddy had hooked up with Gilby Clarke and Slim Jim Phantom from the Stray Cats, and they decided to start a band. And they had a band called Colonel Parker. And so Muddy's like, I got to leave LA Guns. And he called me up and he goes, "Hey man, I know you're mainly a drummer, but I know you play bass. Would you want to play bass with LA Guns?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, of course I would. That would be amazing." So he said, "Don't worry, I'm going to get you the gig." So he made some calls and got me an audition, and I went down and played with him, and it was magic. Once again, it was just one of these magic scenes where I'm like, this is incredible. My life is just one thing after another. And so it turns out they didn't actually want me to audition because they were a little miffed at Muddy for bailing on him when he did. So they're like, well, we're not going to have his buddy, So they said, no, we'll find somebody else. Well, Muddy, they tried to find somebody else and they didn't find anybody they liked. So they called Muddy back and like, what's your buddy's name? What's his number? So begrudgingly, they had me in. But the minute we played and we hung out, we knew like, this is perfect. And they offered me the gig. So
was this where the original guys were in there, right? At that time?
It was all the original band except for the bass player.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was pretty cool getting to play with the classic lineup guys.
Yeah.
And we got to tour that record called Man in the Moon, which was amazing. Went out and played with everybody from, Rat to Dokken to Warrant to whoever.
Did you do that whole tour?
I did that whole tour with them. Yep.
I wonder, we may have met.
We might have.
I met,
yep.
I went, I did an interview with Steve Riley on the bus in St. Petersburg, Florida one time.
We probably did.
That's
probably
funny.
did. And during that tour, we would, on the bus and at sound checks, we would jam songs, and we started to pull together some material, and that ended up becoming the material for the album Waking the Dead. So when we got back off tour, that was the next project we worked on, and it turned out we had some pretty heavy songs. It was kind of going a little bit heavier than Man in the Moon. And we found out I can't remember how we found out, but we found out that Andy Johns was actually available and we might possibly be able to get him to produce us. And so, being the Led Zeppelin fanatics that the band is, we were just like, we'll do whatever it takes. We want to work with him. And so we made a few calls and figured out the budget and figured out that he agreed to work with us for the budget we had to work on. And it was incredible. It was like, talk about going to the old school and learning from getting it right out of the horse's mouth, well, this is how Jimmy did it. And this is how Bonham, set this up. And this is what we used. And these are the mics. I was literally a sponge. I would literally sit there with my notebooks and just ask him
I was going to say, being
questions.
A producer,
I'm like,
you must have loved that.
I was like, this is my college. I never went to school, but this is my school. I'm getting schooled right now. And I was at least aware enough to know that and to take advantage of that. And, I just apologized to Andy one time. And I'm like, I'm sorry if I'm, bugging you with all the nuts and bolts of how to do this, but this is what I love to do. And he goes, listen, and he's like, that's how we learn, my boy. And he was just as kind and gracious and just brilliant, man. Just learning to make records from the guy who recorded, Led Zeppelin and Eric Clapton and Van Halen and the Rolling Stones and on and on and on. And it was just amazing, man. He was just an amazing guy, and his family was beautiful. And we would go hang out and have barbecues over there with them and Roy Thomas Baker and all sorts of crazy other producers and people. And it was another magic chapter, in my life that I got to be blessed with. And losing him was tough. We made 3 records with him. And actually, the band was working on a 4th, but I had left the band at that point. But
how many albums did you do?
I did. Either 3 or 4. I did 3 or 4 with him, and then we had about 6 come out, like compilations and live records and this and that and the other. So about maybe 7. There was probably 7 albums that came out of my tenure with them. Yeah, I think so. But yeah, I had also gotten to the point too where Tracy had gone off to do the Bride to the Destruction with Nikki
Sixx.
Sixx. And, when he went off to do that, he was like, listen, man, we're going to be off the road for a few months. I've been talking with Nikki and I really want to do this. Will you help me put this together? And I'm like, well, yeah, of course I will. This is going to be another magic experience. And
Right.
so we got off the road, and he and Nikki have been talking, and they've been exchanging ideas and stuff. And I knew LA Guns was going to be down for a few months. So we got together, and Tracy and I I was trying to help them find a singer. And so I was like, racking my brain, like, who would be a good singer for them? Who would be a good singer? So I remember going to get my hair cut one day down on Melrose, and the guy who cut my hair is named London, and he had the greatest look, just looked like a rock star. And I said, hey, man, you sing, right? He goes, yeah, I used to have a project. I did some stuff with George Lynch. And I'm like, I might have a possible gig for you. And so I literally took a Polaroid of him. We took it over to Tracy's. I showed him. He sent it to Nikki, and Nikki Sixx, he called him and goes, I don't care if this guy can sing or not. He's in the band. He looks so cool.
That sounds
it
like
was
Nikki.
Just total. I know, right? Total classic Nikki Sixx, right? So I take my recording gear over to Tracy's one Saturday, and we set up in the living room, and we were like, okay, we got to do something to where, like an audition for London so we can hear him sing. So we did a sweet song, just Tracy and I. And Tracy played guitar and bass, and I played the drums, and it turned out sounding really great. And so London came over that afternoon and sang it, and he was amazing. He was fantastic. And so Tracy, we did a little mix, and he called Nikki up, and Nikki came over a couple hours later and listened to it, and it was cool. I was like, okay, I'm watching this thing crystallize right before me, and this is pretty cool. But at the same time, I was kind of like, well, I wonder what's going to happen with LA Guns. It was just kind of, everything was in a state of flux, but it was really fun helping to facilitate watching them put it together. But I knew they already had a drummer. They had Chris Colds from that band Edema. He was going to be their drummer. So I'm like, well, that's their band. And Tracy would say, well, maybe you'll play keyboards, or maybe you'll play second guitar, or maybe there's a place in this for you. So I said, well, you know what? I'll just keep my options open. So I had a buddy who had a rehearsal studio down in Santa Monica, and I hooked them up with that. And he got them a lockout room for a year. So they loaded in there, and Chris Coles was still on tour with Edema. So for the first couple of weeks, I would play drums, and me and Nikki and Tracy would jam. We jam like old Motley, and we jam old LA Guns and Free. And what's really cool was Nikki hadn't played a lot of those Motley Crue songs in a long time, and I would literally like show him some of the lines. I'm like, no, this is what you played. He goes, oh man, I completely forgot that. Yeah, so like I actually knew some of them that he had forgotten. So that was a story for the ages as well. But, and I think John Corabi came down for a little bit and played a little bit, and they considered having him in the band, before it all kind of really crystallized. And it turned out Chris Coles wasn't going to do it. He was going to stay with Edema. And so that's when they got Scott Coogan. So it just worked out that Coogan was right time, right place, and he was the perfect guy for it. And then I got a call from Steve Riley, and he said, LA Guns is going to go to Europe. We got a tour opening for Alice Cooper over in Europe. And I had never been to Europe. And I was like, look, I don't have a permanent home in this thing. This thing is not taking off at any time soon. I'm not making any money from it. I've never been to Europe. I really wanted to go. And I just said, I got to do it. So everybody was like, of course. So we had Brent Muscat from Faster Pussycat filling in for a while, and Carrie Kelly for a while, but nobody was really planned to be. Really, it was just kind of going to be a sabbatical for Tracy to do the band with Nikki, and then Tracy was going to come back. That was the whole plan. That was what everybody was planning. And so we went to Europe, and it was amazing. It was everything I ever dreamed about and more. And we just had a fantastic time. And by that time, though, Carrie Kelly and Brent Muscat went on that tour. So we had a 5-piece at that point.
And you were playing bass at this time? And
I was playing bass. Okay. Yep, I was playing bass for LA Guns. And so then we came back from that tour and just kind of toured around the country for the next year or two. And when I would come home off the road, I would get calls from different companies about needing songs for different projects. And they were like, hey, we have this movie, we're looking for this song. So that was kind of my day gig. You know, I'd come back and maybe produce a band or work with some friends' band in the studio while we'd be off, and I'd get to do some songs for TV and film or a video game or something. Or we did a Chips Ahoy commercial, me and my buddy Chris Seafried. So I always had this great duality. It's like I get to go be rock star and get to pay doing what I love to do, and then I get to come home and I get to do all the other side of it. So it was just a brilliant balance that I was being able to experience. But at some point, I kind of started to feel like, you know, I kind of felt like I'd been in LA Guns a long time. Tracy wasn't coming back. There was kind of this rift. He'd started his own LA Guns. And I just kind of felt like I'm not digging it as much. I love the guys. It's nothing personal. But I was just digging the studio. And one of the things that there was two things that kind of cinched the deal for knowing that it was time for me to make a move was I was missing out on a lot of movie projects. I was getting the call and I couldn't do it because I'm like, I'm not going to be back for 3 weeks. And they're like, oh, well, we got to go with somebody else. And I'm like, this sucks, man.
Well, I would imagine that's where the money is too, right? Well,
yeah. I mean, I had just had a song in the first Born Identity movie with Matt Damon, you know, so I'm like, well, this is great. Then I can't miss these opportunities, you know. I just can't miss when Woody Allen needs a song for a movie and he's, you know, he used one of my songs and now he wants another one of my songs for another one of his movies, and missing out on those kind of opportunities. I'm like, listen, I'm not getting any younger. I want to do this. And I ended up hooking up with a producer manager who was like, you know, managed a lot of my producer heroes. And he goes, listen, if you're going to do this, you got to be available and you got to be around. And I was like, you're right. He kind of made the decision for me. And so I told the guys, they totally understood. They gave me their blessing. And I just, you know, decided that's what I was going to do. And that's when I just kind of veered off that path and said, my life is now going to be in the studio. And it has been ever since, except for, a couple of months, a couple of years ago where I went on tour with LA Guns and filled in on rhythm guitar before Ace joined the band. Yeah. I did an American run and did a European run with him. But, you know, I'd always stayed friends and with Phil. I mean, Phil and I always worked on stuff. We were always doing different projects. He and his wife were always coming over and hanging out. We were family. Yeah. But I hadn't really spent a lot of time with Tracy over the years because he was kind of doing his own thing and we just didn't see or talk. But it was really cool when that all came back together and, you know, they decided, listen, Phil and Tracy mended the fence and they realized that it was better together. They're stronger together and worth more. And they missed one another and they figured out how to make it work. So I definitely jumped at the chance to work with those guys again, you know, when that was offered to me and had a great time doing it.
What do you think about the two LA Guns?
I think it's terrible.
Yeah.
I think it's you know, it's listen, you know, Kelly Nichols was offered the job as bass player from LA Guns many, many times. And he took it for a week and then bowed out. And then he was offered it again a year later. And he just, you know, the timing wasn't right. Well, you know, timing has to happen when it happens. And, you know, I don't like it. It's terrible. You know, it's hard enough in this world, in this economy, to make it as, you know, it's just diluting the brand.
Yeah, I hate to see that. And you know, there's so many other bands that do that same thing, and it's like, man.
it just makes things look. It's a bad look for everybody.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you did somewhere along the line, you filled in for Dokken a little bit.
Yeah, that was one of the right before we came off that last tour in LA, and Tracy started working with Nikki's on Brides. We played that was a tour we did. It was that Metal Edge 2002 summer tour. And it was Dokken and Warrant and Rat and us and Firehouse. And we had done the whole summer, one of the most fun tours with everybody on the tour was just a blast. Just the greatest guys. We just had so much fun listening to each other's set the whole night. It was a great tour. And then we finally got to the last show in Phoenix, and that's where Mick Brown lives.
Yeah.
And I think I remember the story. He got home, something happened, and he just said, "That's it. I'm done. I'm not playing the show." And so I remember hearing them talking with Bobby Blotzer, and they're saying, "Well, listen, we don't want to cancel tonight. We're gonna have to do it." Well, I knew the whole Dokken show backwards and forwards, on drums, bass, or guitar.
You knew everything.
I knew, I loved Dokken. I loved the songs. After 3 months of hearing it every single night, I could play it to you, one arm tied behind my back.
Yeah.
So I kind of went on the bus, and I'm like, "Hey, listen, if you guys don't want to cancel this, I'll do the show for you." And I'm confident enough to tell you, I think I'll do a good job. So we had a little like quick impromptu little jam session, and they are like, "Yeah, let's do it." And I ended up getting to play a show with them, and it was incredible. It went off without a hitch, and it was the last show of the tour, and Tracy came out and played, and Jenny Lane came out and sang, and the Rat guys came out. Warren DeMartini came out and jammed, and it was just one of these giant, great ways to end the tour. And I got to get them through their last night, and it was cool, man. It was another, and I have it on film, which is great. So it was another one of those moments of like like the video of the Who playing, and Keith Moon passes down, like, "Can anybody play drums?" And the guy jumps up there and plays. Well, it was like that. It was pretty cool. And it was really funny to have Don Dokken turning around after every song going, "Whoa, this is cool." And he just kept getting more confident as the set went, because he saw that like I actually know this pretty good, and I'm really a drummer. And I don't think he realized that he just knew me as the bass player for LA Guns, who played drums. But I was really a drummer who just played Guns and LA Guns. So there was kind of vice versa. So
that's funny.
It was kind of a fun, surprising thing to get to do.
Yeah.
And I actually went out and played got called to do another couple of gigs with them through the years, to pitch hit when Mick couldn't do it. But, and one of them ended up, the whole band got sick, and Mick was at the hospital and couldn't play. And they flew me out to Salt Lake City. And by the time I got there, the whole band had gotten sick, and they had to cancel the show in the end. And I flew back, and I got sick the next day. So they just passed it around.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, but it was fun getting to know them. And now I've been friends with John Levin since then, and he's just the greatest guy. And he lives right out in Woodland Hills, and we're friends with them. It's just, they're great people, man. I love all of them.
As a drummer, I mean, to know all the songs, I mean, I guess it's probably a lot easier than guitar or bass even, because with guitar and bass, you have to know, you have to kind of know the song. Drums, you could probably get away with a lot, can't you?
I think so. Yeah, you can. I think if you're a strong, confident enough drummer, you can. I mean, listen, you drop a stick, you still got another hand going to be able to keep the beat going. I think there's a little bit more, you have a little bit more give and leeway in it. Absolutely. I don't think I would have been as confident if the bass player that night had to get up and play the bass. I think I probably maybe could have pulled it off. But I certainly wasn't like, "I'm ready. I could do this. Let me add them," like I did with the drums, because drums were always my number one instrument, and I'm always more confident at that than anything else, just because that's what I've been doing the longest.
So if you were going to play in a band again, you would prefer it to be drums?
Yeah, I think so. But man, you got to be in shape to play an hour and a half on drums, and I'm a little older now, and I'll do a 3.5 minute song in one take, and I'm like, "Oof, boy, I need to start getting my cardio up
Get
again."
on the bike.
Yeah, I need a Peloton for sure. That's funny.
So after playing, you got into producing, which you said you're doing now.
Yep. I came back, and after I just kind of made the decision to get in the studio, I remember having coffee with Brian Pereira from Cleopatra Records, and we had kind of become friends and started hanging out. And Brian said, "Listen, I heard something you produced for us, and before I even knew you a couple of years ago, it was for Great White, and it sounds really good, and I really loved it. I'd like to get you on some other stuff." And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Listen, I'll keep you working if you want to work." And I'm like, "Let's do it." And they've kept me busy for the last 15 years now. From project to project. And when I like we were talking about, I always loved different styles of music. And it's rare for anybody who is a music producer to get to work in different styles of music. Quincy Jones always said, "You can't categorize music. That music musicians need to be able to play what they feel like playing. If a producer, he worked with so many different artists, but producers get pigeonholed into like you're a metal guy or you're a country guy or you're a this.
Yeah.
And I understand the need to categorize, but I also hate that because like I love different styles of music. I love getting to work with different artists and different bands. And the cool thing about the label that I do most of the work for is, I've gotten to produce everybody from, Missing Persons to Berlin, some 80s kind of, stuff like that, to a Vanilla Ice record, to a William Shatner, to a David Hasselhoff, and everything in between, just strange and wonderful stuff that just go in all sorts of different directions. And I get to make music in that. We did a blues record, but I grew up playing blues and love it. I don't get often, with William Shatner, I don't often get a chance to make blues records. So that was really cool.
Did Cleopatra hook you up with William Shatner?
Yeah, that's how I ended up getting to work with him and know him. Was I got a call from Brian one day and he said, "Hey, I think we have a potential project that I want you to produce, and I think you're going to find it really interesting." He's like, "I got a meeting next Tuesday, and I want you to be there with me. It's with William Shatner." And I'm like, "Oh man, this is going to be fun." And so we just went and sat down and talked with him, and I loved his album Has Been record. I think that was brilliant. It's just a classic. Shatner fans, people who love it. That song, Common People, that he did, that single was just amazing. But at the same time, it was so cool and so good. And he did it with Ben Folds, who was, incredibly talented, and had Henry Rollins on it and had Joe Jackson. And I said, that sets the bar really high. I'm a little afraid that's, going to be a tough milestone to reach, something like that. And he said, "Well, listen, we're not trying to make Has Been Part 2. We're trying to do something completely different." And he really let me do what I do, and we made something really cool. He had a real concept about the character Major Tom from all the songs, and he's like, "Who's Major Tom? I want to tell his story and use different songs that have him in it as the lyrics." And he's just such an amazing creative guy.
Is he as cool as he seems?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He's always the coolest guy in any room. He's just so sweet, so gracious and kind. I never thought through this process that I would end up becoming friends with him, but my wife and little girl, we go over to their house and watch Monday Night Football with him and his family and during the fall, and we hang out fun. And I go to his horse shows, and I call him when my buddy's having a birthday, and I say, "Hey, we do a video message," and he'll just like, "Absolutely, what's his name?" He's just super cool.
Yeah, that's
super
awesome.
Cool.
I love to hear stories like that.
Yeah, he's fantastic, man. Absolutely fantastic. And he just turned 90 this past week. I mean, what? And he's just still going. He has this thing where he says yes to everything, and that leads to amazing things happening. You could sit back and say, "Well, this gig's not worth enough money. It's going to be a lot of trouble. I'm going to have to travel." He just says yes, and incredible things happen.
Sure.
And when we were making that first record, it turned out the guy who was curating talent, reaching out to different people to get a guest star playing on different songs, we were going to do a cover of Iron Man, and he reached out to Zakk Wylde to see if Zakk wanted to play on it. And Zakk was a huge Trekkie fan. And so Zakk said, "Absolutely, I want to do it. And I want you guys to come up to my studio up in Castaic when I do it." And so he said, "Ask Bill if he would come up." So I was like, man, I don't know if Bill Shatner, an 80-year-old guy, is going to want to go hang out with Zakk Wylde the whole day. To me, it sounded incredibly fun. But I'm also,
right.
This is a whole different thing. And I remember asking Bill if he would be interested in that. And without even blinking an eye, he said, "Absolutely. Tell me when we're going." And we went up to the studio, and we got there about 10 in the morning. And I thought we'd be there a couple of hours because all we had to do was record the solo. We didn't come out of there till nighttime. We were like
just hanging out,
food in, hung out. His studio was on the top of this mountain, so you just overlooking like 3 or 4 mountain ranges up in Castaic.
Yeah.
Eagles flying by this bay window of the studio. And his studio has, over 500 guitars. It looks like a Guitar Center wall. And it's just like a rock and roll museum. And Zakk is just an incredibly interesting guy himself, in and of himself. and he and Shatner hit it off, and they're just talking about World War II and this and that and Star Trek, and it was just sitting back and being a fly on the wall, and I have film of that day too. It's just fantastic, just fantastic, and it ended up turning out great, and the record came out, and we got a #1 on the Billboard Heatseeker chart. So
Awesome.
and on top of everything, I get my first Billboard #1. It's just crazy, man.
Yeah,
just
that's
crazy,
awesome.
and then I got to produce we did a Christmas album a few years later, and then the blues record 2 years ago. So it's been I've gotten to do so much amazing stuff with him, and then gotten to do so much more that I would have never dreamed about. Could never dream it up.
So when you're producing, I mean, what's your thoughts going into a session as a producer?
Well, every situation is different. But I think as a producer, the things that I've learned from all these great producers, from Quincy Jones to Don Was to Andy Johns, is what you're trying to do is you're trying to help you're trying to be a service. You're trying to help the artist. It's all about them, and it's all about their songs. How do I help you achieve getting something great? How do we take this to the next level? How do we make this sound great? How do we make this sound like you're hearing it in your head? Sometimes that means you're a mediator between band members, and you have to know how to be a shrink, and you have to sit down and talk to somebody when he's fighting with one guy, or maybe you have to learn. It's meant wearing a lot of hats, and a lot of the records I do, I have to engineer too, which I love doing. But at the same time, those are fun hats to wear separately. But wearing it at the same time, something's going to kind of suffer because you're running around a lot.
Yeah.
It's challenging, and by the end of the day of a typical session, you kind of feel like you ran a marathon. But it's very rewarding and amazing when you sit back and you listen to a song and you're getting chills, and the artist is patting you on the shoulder, going, "Oh my God, it turned out better than I thought," and you're just like, "Oh, fantastic,"
Yeah.
But every situation is different. But that's all I try to impart to them, what I've learned and what all these great producers, what I learned from them. I just say, well, this is how I learned how to do it. Sometimes it's just staying out of the way. Sometimes you just meet an artist and you're just like, the best thing I can do is not interfere with what you do. Just hit the record and get out of your way, not say a lot, and let you do your thing. And then again, maybe sometimes people need a lot of help, and you really, literally, I'll work with you. I'm working with Sheryl Crow on the first Shatner record, and just literally setting up the mic and just say, "What do you want me to do?" And you tell her, and she does it, and you just get chills listening to her sing, and you're like, she's as good as it gets, and knows the gig, and is such a gifted artist. And then I'll work with a new young band, like I worked with a band called Veins of Jenna, and they're a super really cool young band, but the drummer was having a little problem grooving, and I literally have to go into their pre-production room and figure out, how can I help this guy take it up a notch? How do I help him learn to groove a little better? And I would literally study his drumming, and I'm like, well, look at his body mechanics. It's all the way he's sitting. He's sitting so far away from the bass drum pedal, he can't get any good velocity on it. He's struggling. He's working too hard, and just helping him recreate, change a few things, tweak a couple of things, and all of it's like, oh, now he's sitting up straighter, his back's not hurting, and he's grooving a little better, and his time's better. And it's like, just sometimes it's just being that outside person to bounce ideas off of. Maybe you just, or maybe they trust you enough till they treat you like the other band member, and they're really bouncing ideas off of you, So I think every situation is different. You just have to know how to go about it. And, I just learned to do the best I can, and just serve the song and the client in the best way you possibly can. That's the first thing I say whenever I meet with people. I'm like, how can I help you? Let's figure out how I can help you. And sometimes it works out great. Sometimes it's, the one and only time you work with them, but that's life. I think it's great to work with different people, because you'll just grow and evolve in different ways, and take things you learn from one person and go on and take something you learn from somebody else. And but yeah, it's amazing getting to wear all those different hats.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What makes you decide to take on a project? I mean, there's had to be some times where you've declined.
Well, you got to pay the rent. That's the one.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the one thing you got to. And I kind of subscribe to Bill's saying yes to things.
Mm-hmm.
I a lot of times I think of it as like, well, maybe this is going to be a challenge. Maybe this really isn't in my wheelhouse. There have been certain things where I've said, I really feel unqualified to do this.
Yeah.
Maybe my buddy might be a little bit qualified. And sometimes they're like, that's fine. We want that. We don't want somebody who's, knows everything about this type of music, whatever. So I think that, sometimes it's about the challenge, and sometimes it's just about, it's rare that I will do something and say, well, I wish I hadn't have done that.
Sure.
There's always something great that comes out of it in some way, shape, or form, I think.
Yeah. So you happy where you are now? You seem like you are.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I'm more than blessed, and I feel so thankful that I don't have to be away from my wife and little girl, and I can work from home every day because my little girl has cerebral palsy. So,
Right.
she has to have constant care, and we have a nurse that comes for her that will help with her going to school. And of course, most of the kids are doing school by Zoom.
Right.
So they're all home. But, if I were traveling, I just don't think we could hold it together because my wife just
it'd be
needs.
difficult.
It takes a team to make it all work,
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it's fantastic, and we live a little bit out of Hollywood, so we're not in the thick of things and the craziness of things. My studio is at my place. It's like, man, there's days where I just don't even have to leave the house. It's quite a blessing, man, to be able to do it all here.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Hey, tell me about, you also worked with David Hasselhoff. How was that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that was with the same label. I got that call and they said, hey, we've got a gig that might be interesting. Let's go meet with him. And it turned out to be the Hoff. And he was fantastic. He was
he?
the thing that I never knew is I always knew he did music, but I didn't really know anything. So immediately when you say, all right, I'm going to meet with this guy in a week, let me do my homework. So I immediately dug in and got on the line and just went down the rabbit hole of things that he's done musically. And it was pretty cool and enlightening. I'm like, wow, this guy seems to be really talented in music. He just seems to, unfortunately, be paired up with people and producers and writers who are just unfortunately taking him kind of a cheesy, corny way.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, I think that that was probably the biggest challenge because when I met with him, I realized that he actually was a musician before he was an actor.
Right.
So I'm like, this guy is old school. He knows how to sing in key. He knows how to do takes. He doesn't have to be tuned and edited. He's like one of those guys that just, learned to do it, learn the craft. And so that part of it I said was going to be easy. But I said, now we need to figure out what he wants to do. And Brian said, look, I have a kind of a concept. Let's start putting together some songs from that era that would be great. And so we were starting to kind of like go through the music libraries and figure out what would be great material. And I said, I think the thing that he's lacking that I would like to see happen with him musically is like, it'd be nice to see him like do something to get a shred of credibility. Like, let's bring him in some stuff that's really great. And so I started to think of, he kept saying he wanted to make a cool record. And I'm like, okay, I keep hearing him say cool, cool, cool. Well, if I'm thinking 80s and I'm thinking cool, I'm like, one of the coolest bands I loved was like Lords of the New Church and stuff like that.
Right.
And I'm like, I would love to, let me take him, Open Your Eyes and see what he thinks. And I remember taking him that. He liked it. And he started reading the lyrics. He's like, whoa, like talk about, this guy was writing this back in the early 80s and how true it is today. It really like struck a nerve. And he goes, this song would be great. And so from that song, I'm like, there's nothing cooler than that. We did a little demo of it and he sang it. I'm like, whoa, he sounds great singing this. I mean, imagine David Hasselhoff doing Stiff Bader and doing it like where it's like he's really selling it. And it's not just like, he's pulling it off, but like he's doing it. It's like, this is working. So that song kind of became like the hub of the wheel, the cog of the wheel. I'm like, now we just need to use that song and find others that he can deliver and do great. He'll sound great on, and then are cool. And we put together a record that I really thought was cool. And he still calls me. He called me the other day when he found out my dad passed away, and he said, "Man, my condolences, and how you doing?" And he'll just leave me messages, and he'll say, "Man, we really did something, and it was really cool, and it was really something special." And I was like, who cares how many albums it sold? That I was able to help him, achieve something cool that he really wanted to do artistically, and something that I was proud of, that he's really proud of, and we made something great. And,
yeah, that's got to be gratifying to get that call.
It is, man. It's the ultimate pat on the back. It really is. And we had an incredible team working on it, and Jürgen Engler and I co-produce a lot of these records together. We co-produce them, and Jürgen was in. His band is Die Krupps from Germany, and he's just an incredible writer, singer, producer, guitar player, just multi-instrumentalist, and he's just amazing. I mean, he was one of the forefathers of industrial music. I mean, Rammstein kind of founded their sound on Die Krupps. That's kind of where it came from, and they actually nipped a bit of Die Krupps' song, and they had to give Jürgen writer credit. So he's got a writer credit on their Rammstein's first record, because they were their biggest influence. But he's kind of like one of the godfathers of industrial music, and he's like an older brother to me now, and where I just I call him all the time, and we work on projects all the time, and I just learn so much from him because he's just so talented.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, just one thing leads to another, and you just say yes to certain things, and who knows what happens, and along the way, hopefully you can, make a living doing what you're doing, and go on the journey of life.
Yeah. So tell me about Sunbomb.
Sunbomb was Tracy and Michael Sweet had started chatting. I can't remember how they hooked up, but they had started chatting, and they started kind of kicking around the idea of, like, they were talking about this new when the new metal, what was it called? New album, new wave of British heavy metal first came out, early Iron Maiden and all that stuff, and how much they both loved that sound. And they're like, God, wouldn't it be fun to do a record that sounded like that captured that vibe? And they just looked at each other and they go, that's what we're going to do. That's our concept, is we want to, like, try to get that capture of that sound, but our version of it. And so they literally went into it. It's so great when you have that vision and you have a concept, because it's like having a great title of a movie you want to write, and then you go, okay, let's write this movie. What's for chapter 1? What's chapter 2?
Yeah.
It's much easier than saying, hey, I want to make this great movie, and I don't know really what it's going to be about, and I don't really know what I'm going to call it. Sometimes I find that some of the greatest songs happen when I have a great title. So I have a page in my notebook that I just write titles down. If I think of a great title, I'm like, ooh, I'm going to write that song one day, and that's going to be the title.
Yeah.
It can just be a different way of creating. So they had this concept, and Shane, who was the drummer in LA Guns at the time, was going to play drums on it. Something happened, and Shane ended up getting a gig with Kanye West, and so he left LA Guns and couldn't do the Sunbomb record. So that's when Tracy called and said, hey, would you want to play drums and mix this? And I said, absolutely. And so that's how that happened.
There you are again, in the right place.
Right place, right time. You get that call and you say yes. You just don't think about it. Just say yes. And one thing leads to another. And, it would have been a lot of fun if we had been able to go on Capitol Records and all do it together, but it just turned out Tracy was over in Europe. Michael was in Boston and I was here, and we literally spoke on the phone one time, and then we literally made the record by just texting and emailing.
Really?
We would send each other files.
It sounds killer, what I've heard of it.
Well, I think so too. Thank you. I think those guys wrote a really great record, and it turned out fantastic. And it is what it is. It's not for everybody. Not everybody loves that sound, but for the people that grew up loving that sound, I think they kind of did a good job of capturing it. I mean, it kind of has that old school, early '80s, new wave of heavy metal vibe to it.
Definitely. And Michael's vocals are on point.
Yeah, he's incredible, man.
Yeah,
it's really fun getting to make records with some of these guys and getting to just solo their vocals and listening to them. And going, oh my God, just incredible, man! Dissecting the listening to them just in the raw form, and just hearing hearing that gift they have is just, just give you chills, man.
When does that album come out? Next month?
Yeah, any day now. I think they released the second single. So as far as I know, I don't know what the street date is, but I know it's their pre-orders going, and it's any day now.
Yeah. Is it going to be a band, or was it just a project?
I think it was. They said, well, we'll see how it goes, and then the pandemic hit, and then you're like, well, it'll probably just be what it is.
Right.
Because I can't really realistically foresee me going out and playing drums for them, just for many reasons. Not that they wouldn't anyway, but who knows? Who knows? You never know, man. You never know.
We'll see how it goes. All right, Adam.
Absolutely.
Well, listen, man, it was great talking to you.
Great talking with you too, man.
I'm glad we got this thing working. I'm going to have to go back and see what's going on with that little adapter.
Yeah. Well, let me know if you need anything else, man, or if something isn't clear, or you need to fill in some blanks or whatever, man.
Yeah. All right, buddy.
That's all for this week. Join us next week for another episode of the Rock and Roll and Coffee Show podcast. Available on all your favorite podcast listening platforms.